Keir Starmer wanted President Trump to keep Britain out of tariff hikes altogether. And a month ago in the White House, there was a glimmer of hope.
Mr. President, did our Prime Minister persuade you not to put tariffs on the UK?
He tried. He was working hard, I'll tell you that. He earned whatever the hell they pay him over there. Thank you very much.
But now President Trump's team say he wants a tariff big bang moment. Every country gets hit. One new study says if everyone then retaliates, the consequences could be very grim.
In the worst scenario, when the Trump tariffs will be retaliated upon by all the countries in the world, which is the worst, we should be expecting trade collapse to some extent.
The last time US tariffs were at the levels President Trump intends to set them, they contributed to the Great Depression. Professor Du thinks history won't repeat itself, but much depends on whether the tariff wall is permanent or a negotiating ploy.
So you are asking a billion-dollar question, and everybody is trying to guess what he wants to do. It's very hard to say what he wants to do from the actions which look disorganized, chaotic. I'm not sure whether he knows what he wants to do.
Is President Trump leading us on?
Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds had been hoping Britain could be spared all tariffs tomorrow. Cabinet ministers were told that wasn't going to happen. The hope now in government is that the offer of an amended digital services tax and other trade sweeteners will get Britain reduced tariffs in time. Sectors like pharmaceuticals are bracing themselves for an announcement which could harm their investment, cut research and raise prices.
For the UK pharma industry, America is 50% of the global market, and in a sense it's where much of the profit is made in our industry.
So this is a big blow, potentially.
It's a big concern. We haven't seen what the proposals are. I think only President Trump knows what he's going to announce.
Pharmaceuticals bosses say they don't want tariff retaliation, and Keir Starmer indicated to cabinet ministers that wasn't Britain's plan. But it is the plan for the European Union.
Europe has not started this confrontation. We do not necessarily want to retaliate. But if it is necessary, we have a strong plan to retaliate, and we will use it.
We're going to be very kind.
Mr. President, you met with the chair.
Somebody said that about me the other day. They said, who doesn't know me very well, they said, "You're such a kind person." And I said, "Say that again." They said, "You're a kind person." I said, "I've never heard that before."
President Trump's announcement will come tomorrow evening. The White House confirmed new tariffs announced then would come into effect within hours. A firm start date for a new era with no sense of an ending. Well, the flame of hope was still flickering for Keir Starmer that there might be a complete exemption for Britain as recently as Sunday night when he called the White House. But the word came back that President Trump and the team wanted that big bang moment. They didn't want it watered down. These tariffs will go ahead universally. It leaves a number of giant questions for Downing Street to which they don't truly know the answer. When they get their own sort of limited trade deal negotiations back on track, could that lead to zero tariffs, an exemption for Britain? Could it lead to a reduced level of tariff? If it's 20% universal tomorrow, could it bring it down to 10? Could they ever exempt steel and car, or are they perpetual? And this goes to the heart of another question, which is totally unresolved here. Britain doesn't feel it knows what's inside its closest ally's mind, which is this a permanent giant tariff wall around America, a new source of revenue, as sometimes you've heard Donald Trump and other people around him say, or is it intended as an opening gambit in a negotiation in order to be brought down potentially to zero? I do feel, though, in government there is a growing acceptance that actually this wall in some ways is, on Donald Trump's watch, a permanent thing, and at best you might get some bricks removed.
Gary Gibbon in Westminster. Well, how are Americans viewing Trump's tariff policies? Our Washington correspondent, Siobhan Kennedy, is in Florida tonight, where special elections are taking place to fill 2 congressional seats. Siobhan, you've got some voters then in Florida. What's the mood tonight?
Well, Kieran, I'm at a polling station here in Daytona Beach, near Daytona Beach in Florida. I can tell you I've been speaking to some Trump voters, Republicans. Of course, they're pretty wealthy. Many of them are not worried about the tariffs. They realize that there will be some short-term pain for consumers, but they believe it'll all even out and that in the long term, American jobs and manufacturing will come back. They trust Donald Trump to get the job done. I did also speak to one liberal Republican and to some Democrats. They are not fans of the tariffs at all. They're very worried about price increases across the piece and that it will be exacerbated if countries in Europe and Asia choose to slap reciprocal tariffs on top of American goods. So there's lots of confusion about here and fear about what's to come and what it'll mean for them. Here's a snapshot of what some voters told me earlier. You're not worried about tariffs rising, making prices rise and making life more difficult for people?
You have to do what you have to do. It may go up, it will come back down.
I would like to see more jobs back in America, and I think that raising the tariffs will get some more jobs back into America. Some of the tariffs, I think, are very fair. Some of the ones against China, who we've long had deficits of that we've been charged, but they have not been charged.
How do you feel?
Depressed, because that tariff that will be passed to me. When I buy a car, the money that is increased will come from my pocket.
Are you worried it's going to raise prices for consumers like yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. See, that's the kind of energy I don't like. If you're not in politics and you're just a mom just trying to get by and live life, like all this is just making it more complicated for me, and now I'm getting involved, which is good, get involved.
Well, the White House press secretary said the president today, right now, is huddled with his trade and tariff team, putting the finishing touches on what they are describing as one of the most important days in modern American history. She wouldn't give us any details about the tariff levels other than to say they will kick in immediately tomorrow. Now, whether or not fear about tariffs and cuts in general show up here in the polls tomorrow, we will find out later on tonight. It is unlikely that the Republican candidates will lose in these two special elections, but Donald Trump is worried enough about it that he is watching both of them, we're told, very closely.
Thank you, Siobhan.
Now, while the government has to wait to find out the impact of President Trump's new tariffs, UK consumers are already facing a series of price rises. A whole host of essential household bills, from water to stamps and TV licences, are going up this week. So could it tip the country into a new inflationary crisis? Our economics reporter Neil MacDonald is here. Neil, let's start with the immediate pressure. What's happening to household bills?
Well, the short answer to that is a lot of them are going up. I mean, here are the details. So council tax in England is set to rise by nearly 5%. That will be £109 a year on the typical Band D property. Likely to go up by more than that in Scotland and Wales. The average household energy bill up by £111 a year, though that will depend on how much fuel you use. And water up by £123. Again, that will vary by region. But then it's car tax, it's stamp duty, TV licenses, broadband, phone bills, you name it, up.
So is it a return or a continuation of the cost of living crisis?
I mean, this isn't a return to the sort of peaks we all lived through 2.5 years ago, sort of 11% inflation. But the Bank of England does see inflation heading higher this autumn, up to about 3.7%. One piece of good news I can bring you is that energy prices on international markets have been falling, and that could mean that the gas prices that we were talking about today going up, well, they could actually be coming down on July the 1st. Now, these markets are volatile. They're often driven by events in Ukraine, so we can't assume that that is going to happen. I mean, the other thing that the government is keen to remind us about is that the national living wage is going up by 6.7%, actually, and that will mean £1,400 a year extra if you're on it and you're working full time. Though I should mention that there are quite a few companies who would tell you that that increase in the living wage, plus the increase in employers' national insurance contributions also happening right now, is end up going to be passed down to consumers through higher prices or through lower wage growth.
And what do tariffs do to all of this?
Well, if you're talking about the USA imposing tariffs on what we sell to them, then that will probably mean here slightly slower growth and therefore possibly less inflationary pressure. Now, Gary was talking about how the government's plan is to not retaliate. And when you look at what we import from the USA, you start to understand the problem. So of the total that we buy from them, which is £58 billion, well, that includes nearly 20 billion, which is cars, planes, engines. There's then another 19 billion, which is basically oil and gas. And then there's a category of chemicals, which is about 8 billion. That may sound boring, but chemicals includes vaccines, vitamins, bandages, a whole series of other medical products. So if you put tariffs on those things, that means people have higher energy bills, higher car bills, higher medicine bills, and that is something that obviously today people are not going to want to hear. I think the problem for the government is if they don't impose anything, then does that mean that they're just giving away any bargaining chips that they might need in any future trade negotiations with the USA?
Thanks very much, Neil. Well, earlier I spoke to the Treasury Minister, James Murray, and I put it to him that on top of all the other costs of living, we are about to be hit with economic tariffs. And I asked him whether he thought that was going to be pretty catastrophic.
We expect that announcement to affect the UK along with all countries, but we're doing everything we can to secure an economic deal.
But you're doing everything you can, but it wasn't quite enough, was it? Not up until this point.
Well, look, the negotiations are continuing intensively. They've been happening since the Prime Minister went to Washington earlier in the year, and they're continuing intensively ahead of tomorrow and beyond, because we know that getting that deal is in the best interests of people in Britain.
Yes, but you didn't get the deal, though, did you?
Well, we're still negotiating intensively now, so we still are pushing to do everything we can to get that deal. And actually, when the President makes announcements tomorrow, we'll continue to work with his administration to secure a deal, because we know that that is what's in the best interest of businesses.
But some of those businesses may feel that, you know, you don't have quite the fight that is necessary when taking on President Trump and these tariffs. The Canadian Prime Minister described Trump's tariffs as a direct attack on Canadian workers, and he vowed to defend the economy, the country, those workers. The EU have promised retaliatory tariffs. Keir Starmer saying, no knee-jerk response here, let's stay calm. It's not bold, is it?
Well, we will always act in the national interest, and the Prime Minister has been absolutely clear that he will do whatever is necessary in the national interest. Nothing is off the table. We reserve the right to retaliate. But what we also know is that what is the best thing to do to stand up for industries in the UK, the best thing to do to support British industries is to get that deal.
But if you do retaliate, how does that work?
Well, look, you're talking about a hypothetical.
Well, it's all hypothetical at the moment, but it's been hanging over the economy, it's hanging over businesses, and they want to get a sense of where the government's going, don't they?
What I'm focused on right now, and what the government is focused on, is preparing for eventualities, but working intensively to try and secure an economic deal. We're in a different position than some other countries are. We're in a different position than the EU is, because we're having that negotiation, and we should make sure we do everything we can to get a successful outcome of that negotiation for a deal.
You'll know it's a very, very difficult point for millions of people across the country. As we say, there's been price hikes on energy, water, TV licenses, council tax. What can you say to consumers who will be worried, millions of people who will be worried about the future now?
Well, I know that people receiving bills today or in the coming weeks will be concerned when they see the prices of things going up. But I would also point out to them some of the changes which are happening as a result of what the government has done. And this is not to say the cost of living crisis is over, but our plan for change is starting to work. We see the national living wage going up by £1,400. We see the pension, thanks to Triple Lot, going up by £470. Wages are now increasing faster than prices. Living standards are rising the fastest in 2 years. And over the course of this Parliament, the average person will be £500 a year better off.
So 3 million households will lose out under your benefit cuts. Hundreds of thousands of people currently getting the disability benefit PIP will lose an average of £4,500 a year.
What we are determined to do is to make sure that people who can work get the opportunity to work. We want to make sure that we reform the welfare system, and we know that's only possible if the system is sustainable. And I think right now, no one would argue that the system is sustainable. Everyone agrees that the system is broken and doesn't give the right protection for those in the greatest need or in a sustainable way, and it doesn't help people to get back into work when they're able to. So we need to reform the system, and that's what's been driving the changes.
James Murray, thanks very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
We're now joined by Tina McKenzie from the Federation of Small Businesses. Tina was in the White House only a few weeks ago, meeting with the US trade representative in Washington, D.C., as well as Peter Mandelson, the UK ambassador to the US. We're also joined by Emily Kilcrease from the Washington-based think tank, the Center for a New American Security. Recently, Emily, along with other trade experts, got together to work out what might happen if President Trump's tariffs on America's biggest trading partners go ahead. Emily, so you wargamed this. Is there a scenario in which Donald Trump ends up looking like an economic genius for pursuing this policy?
Well, it was a surprising outcome of the game that we ran. We know how trade wars start, but we don't really know how they end. And much to our surprise, we actually found that after a very messy, difficult, economically painful period, there's perhaps light at the end of the tunnel in which, under certain conditions, the US and its major trading partners, including the UK, actually get to a point where they're making deals that are good for them economically, that bring them closer together, and also manage some of the risks associated with economic ties with China. It was surprising, but potentially optimistic.
Okay. Tina, from the Federation of Small Businesses, light at the end of the tunnel, is that how you see it?
Well, we really hope that there's light at the end of the tunnel because so many jobs and businesses are reliant on that US market. As a single country, it's our biggest market to export to, and 60% of small exporters export to the US. So we're hoping for light at the end of the tunnel. I know when I was in Washington, the Office of the Trade Representative actually was keen to get a deal together. Some of the interesting things they were talking about was ensuring that agriculture was part of that deal. And I don't know how much the UK government will want that. Certainly not maybe for the beef and the chicken, but maybe for grains that we're getting from South America and the Ukraine. Maybe we could do a deal on that. So there's definitely technical talks going on. It's definitely an opportunity for the UK. But I think generally...
Did you get any sense, Tina, of, you mentioned agriculture there, of specific proposals that the UK delegation is offering the US delegation? Now, we're talking about giving the big US the tech firms, for instance, some tax cuts. What do you reckon?
Well, I think there's definitely a host of things. I'm not involved in the UK government's negotiations. I was only working on behalf of the FSB, but I think there's definitely a list of things that the UK can offer and a list of things that the US wants. So there's a deal to be done, and the spirit between the two countries and the civil servants is quite positive. Unfortunately for us, so much relies on the EU as well as our biggest group of countries that we export to, and if anything happens with that in tariffs, has a huge impact on the UK economy.
Yeah. And Emily, you talk about, some end game where countries reach deals together, but that supposes that Donald Trump, rows back and offers people carve-outs. There's no sign of that, is there? Tariffs only work for Donald Trump if he doesn't offer carve-outs and people start manufacturing in the US again.
Well, I think it's important to remember that there's a bunch of different things they're trying to do with tariffs. There's a bunch of different flavors of tariffs. And for the light at the end of the tunnel outcome, the US really needs to stay focused on this idea of tackling trade barriers and finding win-win outcomes that works for trading partners as well. Now, to be candid, there's a ton of uncertainty about whether the Trump administration can achieve everything that it's trying to do with tariffs as pretty much the leading tool for almost every economic problem. So in order to get to this more positive outcome, they're going to have to really focus on one objective and think about trade-offs with other goals like generating revenue or domestic manufacturing. Some tariffs will not be negotiable, but I expect that some will be.
Any sense at all from you, Tina McKenzie, that the UK is front of the queue for a carve-out?
Most definitely. That's the impression we were given, especially in light of the superb role that the Prime Minister played recently with the negotiations with the EU and the US after the whole Ukraine situation. So I think that the UK's played really well. And
really? We look like we're in the same boat as everyone else, don't we? All that cozying up has come to nothing.
Well, until we get a deal. So they're mid conversations. The timelines, unfortunately, don't suit the UK. So UK government has to think about how long it's going to take to do a deal, because the impact of these 20% tariffs on the economy here is seismic. Yeah. And if we have small businesses struggling for cash flow and that's halted, then how do they pay wages, and what are the UKG going to do about that? Will they allow HMRC to give small businesses more time to pay VAT and taxes? They have to have a backup plan just in case the UK small business community is hit hard.
Yeah. And Emily, you've given us the best case scenario, briefly the worst case scenario, 20% tariffs on everything for everyone all at once. Doesn't sound particularly good.
It does not sound good. And there's many reasons why that scenario could still unfold, right? If the US is not in deal-making mode, you certainly could end up in a scenario where there's huge tariff walls that just don't come off. That's not good for the US economically. I expect the White House would start to feel some political pressure at that point. If you see inflation starting to spike, if you see constituents calling members of Congress on a regular basis, eventually there will be some real economic constraints that may impact the White House more than we've seen to date if they don't approach this next wave of tariffs as being at least in part negotiable.
Emily Kilcrease and Tina McKenzie, thank you so much for joining us.